guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to day one of the last eyeshadow palette week that we are going to be having on this channel here in the year of 2020. Who is ready to lay 2020 to rest? I know I am. Not saying 2021 is looking to be like the most promising year ever, but I'm ready for I'm just ready to put 2020 in the past. But I'm really excited to be starting another eyeshadow palette week. You guys know, if you are not new to my channel, that I just love eyeshadow palettes. I love to talk about eyeshadow, and it's definitely something that I want to make an even larger part of my channel next year. So if you are new to this channel, welcome. I'm Steph. I love project panning and I love eyeshadows, and if that is something that interests you, I would love if you would subscribe before we move on today. But we are going to kick it off with eyeshadow palette week, talking about 12 palettes in my collection that are non-boring neutral palettes. I got this idea from Julia Muzzucato, who is one of my favorites here on YouTube. If you like eyeshadow content, I highly recommend checking her channel out. I will have her link down below, as well as her her video about non-boring neutrals. It was a while ago that I watched this video, and I didn't go back and re-watch it because I didn't want to get ideas from that video for the palettes that I was going to talk about. But if there are repeats from mine to hers, I do apologize. I'm not remembering exactly which palette she talked about, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some repeats. But like I said, I have 12 non-boring neutral palettes to discuss with you today. If you love neutral palettes, but you like a little extra pizzazz in your life, in your palettes, then this is the video for you. So with that being said, let's just jump into this video. All right, you guys, I want to kick it off with these two. I'm grouping these together as one. These are my Rowan Eyeshadow quads. First up, I have the 75 degree quad, which is a pretty neutral bronze and copper palette. And then I also have my favorite of the two, which is the 1111 palette, which is really beautiful, which is a really beautiful pink and mauve toned color scheme. I'm trying not to blind you. And to me, I mean, obviously you're pretty limited with, if you're just using this palette or one of these palettes on their own, you're pretty limited to kind of what you can do because you have the 4 shades. But what makes these non-boring, in my opinion, is truly, one, just the payoff of pigment, and two, the texture. Each of the shades in these palettes provides a different texture. There's some that are more like cream to powder. For example, this one right here, this very creamy copper shade, is one of the most beautiful coppers in my entire collection. It is a cream shade, and you can put it down and use it as a one shadow and done. You can use it to set your eyes, not set your eyes, you can use it as a base and then set over top with an even more intense shade if you wish. But truly, it's the textures for me with these that just make them really non-boring. Even one shade from one of these palettes on your eyes is going to give you just a really beautiful, unique look, in my opinion. It gives sort of a wet appearance to the eyelid, something that just your everyday basic shadow isn't going to provide you. So I definitely feel like these two quads from Rowan are non-boring. I forgot to mention in the introduction, obviously these are just my opinions, and I'm not trying to offend anyone by saying neutral palettes are boring. I love neutrals, so just because I'm saying something's non-boring and not mentioning other things, I'm not trying to say other palettes are boring or makeup is boring in general, because if you love neutrals, honestly, a neutral quad could be really non-boring to you. But these are just my opinions. I'm not trying to offend anyone. The next palette that I wanted to mention is this one right here. This is the Nabla Dreamy 2 palette. This is what this one looks like, and to be honest with you, it doesn't really even look like a boring palette, at least in my opinion. I do find this one to be more neutral, just because the mattes are more of your browns or your reddy brown shades. Maybe this isn't a neutral palette at all to some, but again, what makes this one truly non-boring to me is the different textures that you're getting within this palette. I've said on my channel before, but Nabla truly has some of the widest ranges of textures within their eyeshadow that I've found in a brand thus far. There's I don't even know how many different formulas they have, but they have quite a few different ones. They have some of these more chunkier matte shades, which I thought were going to be really difficult to work with, but they actually blend easier than your normal everyday matte. So the first few times I reached into this palette, I was a little bit lost on like what I wanted to do or what I wanted to create. But every time I reach into this, I think I'm only going to go in for like a couple of shades, and then I will end up using like 7 shades out of this palette. So even though this, maybe I'm cheating with this, maybe this doesn't even look like really that much of a neutral palette, but really your only pops in this are the purple and the blue. Truly, this is one of my most non-boring, neutral in my opinion, palettes in my collection. Next up, this is a neutral palette, but she is one of my favorites. This is the Persona Identity 1 palette. This is what this one looks like. Pretty much all neutral shades, but the reason I think that this one is so fun is because of the shimmers. The shimmers for me really make this palette fun and really make this palette what it is. There's this shade right here in the shade Bombshell, which looks kind of just like a gold, like a taupey gold, but if it catches the light right, it has this hint of green, and so it's like you put it on your eyes and it's like, okay, like, is she wearing a green shadow or am I being played with this? But truly, I've said this on my channel many times before, so I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record. The shimmers in this palette, you do not need a wet brush, and they are going to give you the most intense shine. They are so foiled. They are like liquid metal on your eyes. I absolutely adore this palette. This is something that if I lost this or if the formula changed on this, I absolutely would replace this because this just serves such a good purpose in my collection. This is one that's come traveling with me before. Not that I know if I'll ever go traveling again, but I love this one, and definitely, in my opinion, a very non-boring neutral palette in my collection. This one is newer to my collection. This one is from Kaleidos, and it's their Sashimi City palette. This is what this one looks like. I adore this palette, and when you look at this, it kind of just looks like your everyday neutral, kind of warm brown with like a hint of coral. But what makes this one non-boring is the 2 shimmer shades in this palette. They just add something that I do not have in any other shimmers like this in my collection. They are so sparkly and so glittery. If you don't like a real sparkle, a real shine, or glitter on your eyes, I probably would not recommend this, but they can just really take a look to the next level. Or if you just wanted a very neutral everyday look, you absolutely can get that from this with the mattes in this palette. I think that this is stunning. I'm so happy to have this in my collection. Highly recommend Kaleidos if you are looking to dabble in indie makeup and you want to start with eyeshadow. I think Kaleidos has such an amazing formula. I definitely recommend. They have a lot of different options. They have their escape pot, and then if you're looking for just a 6-pan, I have 3 of their 6-pan palettes, and I think that all of them are really good. So just find a color story that works for you, and if you're looking for a neutral one, I would probably recommend this one. I have another palette from Nabla. I feel like Nabla really knocks it out of the park with non-boring neutral palettes. This is their secret palette, and this is what this looks like. What I love about this palette is that you kind of have the best of 3 worlds in this palette. So if you want to do like a mauve pink tone look, you have this top row, and you can kind of just, if you struggle to create looks like I do, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to do. It's nice because you can kind of just follow the rows. So you have your pink row. On the bottom, you have just like your basic like brown row with like a gold, a really light kind of champagne shade. But then you have these fun pops in the center row. I love the shade Play Hard. It's this really, really cool kind of transformer shade. It has a really, really pretty green shift to it, and it really doesn't have a base to it, so you can really manipulate this shadow to kind of be whatever you want it to be. I've paired this with not only greens but like pinks and purples too, and it's just really cool that you can kind of manipulate it into being so many different things based on the fact that it just doesn't have that base, and it's almost just like a white and green like shift, but depending what you pair it with, it can look so many different ways. I don't know what I'm trying to say. So I love that this offers the pops. So if you are someone who usually goes for neutrals, but you're looking to just kind of play around with color. Oops. Oopsies. Okay, thankfully nothing broke. If you mostly like neutrals but you want to dabble in color, I like this palette because I feel like especially the shimmers are really like non-intimidating colors to play with. I think playing with color, I know from experience, I used to be terrified of color. It can be super intimidating, but with the Transformer shade and just with some of these shimmers, I feel like they're a little bit less intimidating than some other shimmers or trying to play around with color with mattes. This shade Addiction still intimidates me, but it's there if you want to play around with like teals and blues. And I definitely think this is a really fun neutral palette with some really pretty pops. All right, next up is a very neutral palette, but in my opinion, really fun to play with. This is the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette, and as you can see, there's really no pops of color in this one, but this one, I just love how rich and pigmented the shades are. Sometimes you don't get that with the Naked palettes, but this one is such a great palette. I'm kind of disappointed in myself for waiting so long to pick this palette up because I have really enjoyed my time with this, and I've just loved every single look that I've created. All of the shimmers are very, very high impact and very foiled too, so they can really bring that look to the next level. And again, I just think that the mattes are so nice and richly pigmented that it really just makes a neutral look pop. There's some neutral looks that are just kind of there and on your eyes, and then there's other neutral looks. I'm thinking of like a really sultry, just like warm, smoky eye with like a red lip. I feel like that's something that you can so easily get with this palette. And if you are not looking to play with colors and you're just looking for a really nice neutral palette that's going to make your eyes pop, I would definitely recommend checking out the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. A limited edition palette that you can still find on the Dose of Colors website, and this is truly a favorite in my collection. I'm sure you guys already know what I'm going to say. This is the Desi Katie Friendcation palette. And truly, like, looking at this palette, it really is a neutral palette with like 2 pops of blue, and if you wanted to consider this green a pop, you could as well. This is one of my favorite palettes to play with, and even though it's only 10 pans, you can mix these shimmers to create even more shades. So you can mix like the blue and the pink to create like a purple shimmer. They layer together in a way that kind of mixes the shadows together to create even more colors. So that's why I think this is one of the most versatile palettes I've ever come across in my years playing with different eyeshadow palettes. I also just love this palette for the neutral mattes too. They blend so easily and they create really beautiful looks just on their own. You can do, like, if you want to do a matte with a pop, these 2 pops are very, very neutral, but then you have these fun pops of, again, the green and the blues that I think are less intimidating, that I think are a little bit less intimidating than other colors. Again, this Dirty Money, I think this is actually called Dirty Money. Yes. The shade Dirty Money, this green shade, you can make look pretty neutral too if you pair it with the other like brown mattes in this palette. And I've also had a lot of fun with the blues. So definitely a very, very non-boring neutral palette in my collection. This is another new one to my collection this year, and I don't know if you can still get this one, but I had to talk about this palette in this theme because the Tiny Marvels palette by Sydney Grace in collaboration with Mel Thompson is truly like my definition of a non-boring neutral. For the most part, if you covered up the purple and the green, I can't really do it. For the most part, every other shade in this palette is pretty neutral. You also have this really cool duochrome. It's like a blue-brown shade. And you have like a really bright like yellow gold, but I feel like that's kind of a neutral shade. I absolutely adore this palette. I have created so many different and fun looks with this. I love that Mel incorporated the lavender shade because I love lavender eyeshadow, as well as the really nice kind of pastel green, just to make this palette so unique. And then you also have a range of mauves and browns and just really, really beautiful shimmers. I know that this might not look like a neutral palette looking at it because of the way that some of the colors or the pops are placed, but if you were to take out those 2 colorful shades, you really are left with a pretty neutral palette. So this is one, again, I don't know if you can get this, but if you really enjoy playing with neutrals for the most part, but you want to dabble in color, I think this is a really great option. And I just think Mel did such a fantastic job on this palette. I cannot wait to try more Sydney Grace shadows due to this collaboration. Another brand I cannot wait to try more from is Odins Eye, and I had to mention the Solomane palette. This is what this palette looks like, and this is one of the most non-boring palettes in my collection. So again, you have the majority of just like neutral brown tones with some like oranges and mustards, and truly the only like colorful shade in this palette is the lavender. Try not to blind you. My lights, I don't know how to best set my lights up. But you have this really fun green that reminds me a lot of the green shade in the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette. It's so pretty. Just gives a really beautiful wet look to the eyelid, and it just has a really beautiful shift to it if it catches the light right. You can also do a really neutral look and then pop a little lavender on the lash line just for like a little pop of color. I love the different tones and textures in this palette, and definitely a very non-boring palette in my opinion, with a lot of neutral shades. A favorite palette in my collection, you guys know, is the Mercury Retrograde palette. And this is another one where I feel like if you're looking at this, you might be like, girlfriend, that is not a neutral palette. But if you covered up, I'm really struggling. If you covered up that row, I mean, you really are left with a neutral mauve tone palette. You really are. But I love the pops that are included in this. I have had so much fun with these three shades, also Gold Glitch and Supernova, but I've also used this to create really simple looks for days that I'm flying out the door for work. Sometimes I'll just pop like 1 or 2 mattes in the crease on the lid and call it a day, and I love the way that the look comes out. Very neutral, very work appropriate. But then you have, again, these really intense fun pops. Like here's Nebula. It is more of like a chunky glitter. I'm not sure how well that swatch is going to look. And then I also have the shade Mercury, which is so stunning. Again, it doesn't swatch the best, but on the eyes it's beautiful. And then Ultraviolet. And then here is Ultraviolet, just a really, really beautiful kind of ultraviolet purple. I love these 3 shades. And again, I love this palette for the pops, and I love it for the neutrals. I talk about this a lot on my channel, so I won't drone on about it. All right, we have 2 palettes left. Another new one to my collection this year is the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. This is what this beauty looks like. I'm hoping you can still get this. I'm not 100% sure. This was limited edition. I'm sorry, I don't mean to include limited edition, but I just feel like this fits the theme of this concept so well. So you have a lot of your warm, rich kind of fall shades in here, fall mattes. You have warm browns, you have your mustards, orange, cranberries, this really beautiful kind of pukey mustard shade, and then you also have a few mauve mattes, but then they added the fun pops of green and purple to really make this a fun palette. Again, you might be looking at this being like, girlfriend, that's really not a neutral palette. But again, if you kind of covered up even just like the green and the 2 purples and this matte purple, you really are left with quite a few neutral shades in this. I've done quite a few neutral looks with this palette, but I've also had a ton of fun playing around with like the pops of purple. Like I did a cranberry look with this and then popped the purple all over my lid, and I absolutely loved it. It really made the look something completely different than had I left it with just like the cranberry mauve shades. So again, this is something where you can really go neutral with this, but you can also pop in some of those colors to really make it look like you possibly use like a rainbow palette to create your look. So definitely a non-boring neutral within my collection. And then the final palette that I had to mention has been in my collection for quite some time, and you can't argue that this is a pretty neutral palette. This is the Natasha Janona Gold, but you guys, I don't even use really the blues that often in this. It's the green shade, this like gold green shade, this transformative shade, and these even like just the copper shimmers. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, and I don't find this to be boring at all. I can go into this and create some of my absolutely favorite looks that I have ever created. This is one of my favorite shades in my whole collection. This is the shade Lime Chrome. It's so good. Then we have the shade, oh my gosh, it's just so beautiful. I gotta figure out what the shade name on this one is. We have the shade Brass, which again, if it hits the light right, it has this green shift to it, but it's this beautiful like golden green shift that is Brass right there, the swatch that I just showed you. And then I'm going to show you this transformative shade, which I mean isn't going to look like a ton swatched. There it is right there. But this is something you can pop on top of even any of the other, like, let me see if I can give you an example. Okay, my example didn't work too well, but you can pop this on top of pretty much anything and really transform it into whatever you want it to be. It's really such a universally versatile shade, kind of like that shade in the Nabla Secret palette. I mean, you could pop this on top of like a purple and it would really like make the purples pop. It's like, it's basically got no base and just a gold glitter running through it, and it really can just completely change a look. I also absolutely love this shimmer right here in this palette. This is in the shade Kava. Let me swatch this for you. Oh, it's so stunning. Again, I don't know how well the swatches are going to be looking, especially with my lights that I can't figure out, but honestly, I get so excited every time I reach into this palette. And when I first saw that, like when this first released, I was like, who would ever spend $129 on a palette that like has browns that all look the same? It wasn't until I saw this in person that I really saw the differences in like undertone with the brown, with the matte brown shades in here, and then got to play around with the different shimmers and different textures in this palette that I was like, okay, this is like one of my least boring palettes in my collection, even though on surface level it might look like one of my most boring. So that is gonna wrap it up for today's video, talking about some non-boring neutral palettes within my collection. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments below. What are some non-boring neutral palettes that you have in your collection? What are some that I need to check out? I love me a good non-boring neutral. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting day one in palette week. We've got videos the rest of the week all the way through Saturday. I hope you guys are excited, and I will catch you in tomorrow's video.